Right, so a big welcome to all of you who just joined the session. I see some of the names coming in. So let me just quickly introduce myself again. I'm Ashley from Career Services at the Kuan School of Public Policy. And this is the first time that we are collaborating with the SIG student group, with this current group of leadership to collaboratively introduce this event, which is the future of green finance. Now, before I start the session proper, I'd like to just run through some housekeeping slides. The next slide. So this session will be recorded. Participants, you will be muted upon entry, and I would like to encourage everyone to please switch to speaker's view. Now for this session, we will be taking the question and answer in the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, where you can pose your questions. The Zoom chat function will be disabled, so the option to put in your questions will be through the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. Now, I know we have a variety of participants among us here today, from students in LKY school as well as beyond LKY school within NUS, as well as quite a few of the LKY school alumni have signed up for this event, as well as members of external guests. So I'd like to ask everyone to please rename yourself when you log in to the format that's shown on this screen. So for example, if you're an LKY school student from MPP, then the naming will be MPP 2020 and then your name in full. So some other examples of the other naming is shown on this screen. So for example, students and alumni especially, if you're ex-SIG member, please also indicate, and that's the naming so that we can identify you. And for external guests, it will be organization and then the full name. Okay, so with that, I will hand it over to James.
Hello, everyone. So my name is James Crabtree. I'm an associate professor in practice here at the Kuan School, and I'm going to be your chair for this afternoon. So what I'm going to do, just very briefly in a minute, I'm going to hand over to Ashish from the Sustainable Investment Group, which is our host today, which is a student-led group at the school. And Ashish is going to say a few words of welcome. Then he'll hand back to me, and I'm going to frame the session and introduce our three speakers, and then we'll get straight into our introductions and our debate. And as I think you know, when you signed up, we're going to run through today until 1:45, and we'll leave plenty of time for questions at the end. It's been great that we've got such a big response to this, and that so many of you have felt able to give up your lunch hour to join us here today. So before I introduce the session and introduce our panelists, let me just hand over to Ashish to say a word of welcome from our host group. So Ashish, over to you.
Thanks, Professor. Hi, everyone. A very warm welcome to this very important session on behalf of the Social Investment Group at LKY School. We welcome you to this really important session. Just very quickly, as a student-led group, SIG aims to provide a space for discourse on both the financial as well as the policy and regulatory aspects of social investment, impact investment, much needed discussion, especially in the times of COVID. There's so much spotlight on ESG and sustainability related financing. So we were really extremely, as students of NUS, proud that NUS took the lead and issued a $300 million green bond earlier this year. And we wanted to really understand, and we were wanting to plan this session, and really grateful to all our esteemed panelists who are the brainchild and the leaders behind in putting this together. So we're really looking forward to this session. And I'd like to very quickly thank Professor for chairing this, and as well as our colleagues from, our friends from Career Services to partner with us. I would also like to mention we may have been joined by our founding president, Kuan, who started the SIG today and has been constantly guiding and supporting us. So thanks, everyone. We really look forward to a very interesting and learning-full session. Over to you, Professor.
Very good. Okay, super. So, I mean, few issues matter more from a public policy perspective than green investment, particularly in the aftermath of the pandemic. It felt earlier this year that green finance was really on a roll. The Davos meeting at the beginning of the year was heavily themed around sustainability, and almost with every week that goes by, you see a new, rather eye-popping statistic about the amount of money that is going into to green finance. There was a projection last week that there'd be $1 trillion of green bonds issued by the end of next year, another $1 trillion going into ESG, economic social governance funds, already this year. But this is happening against the backdrop of the pandemic, and as we will go on to discuss, there are various ways in which you might think that COVID could be an accelerant of moves towards green finance when we talk about building back better, in the words of Joe Biden, or potentially it could slow it down as countries begin to look for any source of stimulus and investment, whether it's in green areas or not. So what we're going to do today is we have a fantastic panel to pass through these issues, looking at both the issue of what you might call financing green, namely how do you get more money into green projects, but also greening finance, namely how do you make sustainability a core principle of the entire financial system and the way that companies operate. And so to look at that, we have three guests, and I'll just introduce them briefly in turn. Speaking first, Esther An, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer at CDL, City Developments Limited, which is one of Singapore's largest real estate companies, and for the purposes of this discussion, a pioneer because they launched Singapore's first green bond. And so she is both going to talk about the area of green finance and what they learned from that. Then we have Meronisa Zafar, who's joining us not from Singapore, but from Pakistan today, although normally based in Singapore. And she is the VP for Responsible Finance at DBS Bank, which is a leader in green finance here in Singapore in many different ways. And then finally, representing the home team at NUS, Kuan Tan, just down the road from where I'm sitting on the main Kentridge campus at NUS. And Kuan, after a long and distinguished career in the private sector, joined NUS reasonably recently and has been in charge, as she said, of launching NUS's first green bond earlier this year. And so what our panelists are going to do is both give us a sense of this area and how it's changing, but also we'll look at some practical case studies so we can learn a little bit about how easy, how difficult it is to launch these kind of instruments and the effect that they can have. So each of our speakers is going to talk for maybe 4 or 5 minutes at the beginning. Then I will moderate a discussion between them, looking at their own sense of this developing landscape, how the pandemic is going to affect it, and a host of other issues. And then, as I say, we'll leave plenty of time for questions. As Ashley said in the beginning, if you have questions you'd like to ask, please do leave them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of them as we can towards the end. So let me be quiet and let me hand over first to Esther, a green finance pioneer in Singapore at CDL, to tell us how you see the landscape and also what your experience has been in the area. So over to you.
James, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and you were very right to set the scene there. In fact, I have the honors to attend the COP25 to present the private sector's view at Madrid last year in December. And everywhere I walk around, I can see climate emergency, the sign everywhere. And at World Economic Forum in January this year, and annually they have actually, they conduct a global risk survey every year. And this year, all top 5 business risks are all climate related. And interestingly, number 10 risk is actually related to infectious disease. So after Chinese New Year, as we all know that, our world, our life and our lifestyle, everything, the way we live, work, play, and run our business have actually changed. So as today, let's fast track to today, we are actually facing, the world is actually facing climate, social, health, and also economic crisis. So how are we going to, manage and tackle all these so-called the new normal, all the challenges, that in the months or years ahead? And I think everybody will probably agree that we may not be able to U-turn back to the business as usual before COVID. So there will be some changes here and there, and definitely in terms of like the business sector and the financial sector. If you refer to like UNEP, FI, they have actually issued a report called the Changing Costs. So which actually advocates 3 areas, which is like responsible lending, sustainable and responsible investing, and also sustainable insurance. This actually targeting and all the financial sector. And I think some of you may have heard that there's a saying that accountants are the one who is going to save the world. So I think financial controller, accountants or bankers, analysts, investors are all in this category. So I think for CDL, just backtrack to like 2017, how we actually launched the first green bond, using our Republic Plaza, as like a refinancing package of 100 million. So we were actually, we started the journey in 2016. And in fact, it was really, learning by doing and doing by learning, So we actually, it is an extension of our long 2-decade commitment to green building and sustainability. So what we look at is like, this is a global trend. It started in 2007. Green financing is not new in the world, but in Asia, it is something, quite new. So in 2016, we started doing research and how we could actually tap into this growing, financing stream that's to potentially help us to accelerate our green building movement and our technologies and innovation solutions and all that. And that was actually history. And from there, we issued the first green bond, and happens to be with DBS. Yeah, afterwards you will hear from DBS colleagues to talk about how they actually help us to be the first our green bond as a book runner. And in fact, we have expanded to sustainability linked loan last year. We have 2 loan for the green building new development, and also again partner with DBS again to launch the SDG innovation loan, which I can elaborate a little bit more. SDG stand for the Sustainable Development Goals that you may, some of you are probably familiar with. And I think, simply put, green financing or sustainable financing are enabler, and it is growing really, really strong and fast. And in fact, COVID has accelerated the growth of ESG investing and green financing, and especially the social side of things, which I will explain a little bit more. Before I go on forever, I think my 5 minutes is up. I will. One more thing is like with Kuan, NUS, we are also located. Our Smart Green Home Lab is actually located at SDE 4, which is also part of the the green bond that Kuan is going to talk about. So we are all partners in green here on this panel. I look forward to a very dynamic and interactive discussion later. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Esther. That's terrific. Accountants are going to save the world. This is a good point on which to start the discussion. So, Maranisa, maybe I could turn to you next from the finance side of things. So you were a partner on CDL's bond, but how does the bank approach this, and how do you see the landscape changing at the moment?
Sure. Thank you, James. Thank you for having me here. You've made the introduction. I don't need to introduce what I do, but basically for listeners who may not be very familiar with green financing or sustainability or ESG linked financing, it's where banks or financial institutions link incentives, ESG sustainability incentives, to offer financial incentives if they achieve those performance targets. And Esther has talked about a few examples, of course, where we have partnered with CDL for some very interesting and innovative transactions that we've completed. So financial institutions are a vital link in enabling the rapid economic transformation that's needed to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement and Sustainable Development Goals. I won't get into the details of all of that, but it becomes increasingly apparent in times of COVID, and I think Esther also touched upon that. As the S component becomes important, the E component has been important when we look at the pressures faced by the climate change risks. So although sustainable finance may be, gaining traction, it may be in its, expanding quite rapidly, the pressing threats posed by climate change and rising temperatures have really moved it to the forefront, higher on the agenda at DBS. and I know across the planet, many financial institutions. And with that momentum comes the need to address a variety of issues that could block capital flows. So, especially for emerging markets and in Asia, there is room to improve, the flow of capital and accountability, disclosure when it comes, from corporates, as well as access to reliable data, all of these issues. Speaking of, COVID, it's been well estimated by the World Bank that there could be millions of people who could be pushed into poverty. And I think the key here is that sustainable finance could play a very important role to help economies rebuild and to help people out of this poverty. At DBS, we are constantly exploring ways to expand our sustainable financing that we offer to other areas, such as for SMEs or for agriculture, for innovative loans. At DBS, we've been issuing, green loans, green bonds since 2017-18, and we have done a large number of transactions. And we continue to innovate when it comes to what kind of green products that we offer. So, of course, green finance is a hot topic among corporates and banks who are determined to foster a more sustainable development model. But the imperative is obviously very strong when it comes to the responsibility of the financial industry, because through our lending and investing, we have the power to redirect capital to sustainable technologies and solutions for the future. And the companies doing that work, that are prepared to do that work to make that transition to a net zero emissions economy. One thing that I'd like to specifically mention here and talk about is the launch of our sustainable and transition finance framework and taxonomy. In June 2020, DBS became the first mover in capturing the growing demand for transition financing. This is quite, well, I wouldn't say entirely new, but it definitely is making its way up on the agenda when we talk about, green and what is it that we can do to make corporates and make businesses green. We have to help them transition. The ones that are green are already on their journey. And of course, corporations like CDL are very much at the forefront leading this movement. But there's a large number of organizations that fall into the brown category that could help from a nudge from financial institutions to be able to make that transition and contribute to the United Nations SDGs and also to come up with green financial, green solutions for their own businesses. And so our new financing framework and taxonomy expands the spectrum of industries that our transition finance team can engage with, allowing carbon intensive companies to seek financing to support and reduce their reliance on more polluted forms of business. So, of course, transition finance has amassed a lot of attention, and the challenges of, delineating what exactly that means, it kind of remains unsolved at this point. But the goal is to balance the need for the definition of what is broad enough to be, inclusive yet specific enough to protect our green financing instruments from claims of greenwashing. I don't want to make this discussion too technical, but if anyone has any questions, very happy to answer those.
Very good. Okay, super. We might come back to transition financing and how it differs from green finance overall. This area has lots of buzzwords and terms that we'll be careful to explain as we go along. So thank you for that, Moni. So that was fascinating. It's a great introduction. Okay, so Kuan Wu, tell us about NUS's bond and what that's being used for and spent on, and how you decided to do it. So,
yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, James. I'm an accountant by training, so I thought accountants are usually known to be bean counters. So from counting beans to saving the world, that's a great leap, and I'm not sure I'm up to the task. But anyway, I'm very glad to be able to share with you more about the NUS experience with the issuance of our inaugural Green Bond. Now, we have been looking at various ways of raising for some time. The reason why NUS we need to issue a bond is because we need we use the proceeds to finance our long-term capital projects, essentially buildings, yeah, to support the university, the mission in education and research. So when we first looked at Green Bond, we were not warm to it. In fact, we rejected it because there's no savings in borrowing costs to the university. And on top of that, there are administrative hassles. There are extra work that we need to do in order to set it up and so on. So at first we rejected it because we said that there's no benefit. But later on, as we work with the banks and talk to people who are familiar with green bonds and so on, we said, why not do it? Since the university has already invested in the sustainability for a very long time, in terms of research, in terms of making the campus green and so on, we thought the Green Bond will provide us an additional forum and platform to showcase all the green efforts that the university has embarked on for so many years. So we changed our mind, and that was sometime towards the end of 2019. So we started working on the green bond issuance. In terms of the green bond issuance process, well, first of all, we had to set up a green framework. Now, what does the framework do? The green framework outlines how we plan to use the proceeds, how do we evaluate the projects, and how do we select the projects, and how are the proceeds managed, and finally, how will we report it to the stakeholders? So in the case of NUS, we specified that we will use the green bond proceeds for the 5 uses, one of which is for green buildings and precincts. Once we have set up the green framework, and for NUS, that was not too much of an effort because a lot of green projects are already in place. So when the green framework was set up, we had to find an external reviewer to go through the framework that we have set up, to give an opinion so that people know that it's properly done and so on. And once that's completed, we are ready to go. So, but remember that time, and that was when it was completed, it was in round about May 2020. So we are still going through the COVID-19 period. And of course, with COVID-19 brought challenges in terms of project management. But and in addition, the market was very volatile, right? The equity markets, the money markets, et cetera, were going up and down. But we found a good opportunity, a window of opportunity, and we were able to issue the green bonds for $300 million for a tenure of 10 years, also with the help of DBS. And it was very well received by the investors. Some uniqueness about the NUS bond, I think. Number one, we are AAA rated because of the strong financial position of NUS. Secondly, for the green bond investors, I think NUS appeals to them in special ways because not only is the money invested in green projects, but the green projects in turn become living labs, whereby further researchers are being done. And I think the spin-off benefit of this research would mean a lot to the discerning investors and so on. So looking back, the journey of NUS with our inaugural green bond issuance, from first rejecting it to launching it, post-launch, what we have learned is that there is a very strong growing demand for green investments and so on. So therefore, with hindsight, I'm very glad that we did it because that positions us well to tap this growing demand in the investment market. So that's a brief introduction and an overview of the NUS Green Bond issuance. Back to you, James.
Very good. Okay. Well, let's. I mean, I think maybe probably we should deal with the sort of elephant in the room first, which is the pandemic, and then maybe I'll ask a few questions about your individual projects and the way that you see this area developing. But I suppose if I were to frame it very simply, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are some people who hope that the pandemic, and Esther reflected this in her remarks, that the pandemic could be an accelerant to this transition, in as much as you're going to have recovery packages and stimulus packages which can be spent on green matters. You're going to, governments are able to borrow a lot more at the moment, various different ways in which you might think that there's going to be more money going to green finance. But equally, there's another side to this, which is that countries are going to invest in whatever they can, whether it's coal-fired power stations or what Meronisa called brown, so that they might decide just to build brown instead of greening brown. So I wonder, from each of your perspectives, Meronisa, maybe I'll start with you and then go to Esther and Kuan Wu. How do you see this space changing since the pandemic? I mean, is it now more challenging, or is there reason for optimism that actually this may prove to be a catalyst rather than a barrier?
From what we've seen, there has been no slowing down of the momentum of green financing. We've seen, our clients, our borrowers come with absolute, gusto, but also with a real sense of urgency, because there is that pressure on corporations to improve their sustainability performance, to build back in so many ways. And we've seen this kind of there is this rhetoric that COVID may lead to some kind of slowing down of the sustainability, the green finance, that movement. But we have not seen that. We see that our clients, and we of course partner with a lot of like-minded clients. Our borrowers are companies that are really wanting to make that push. And we feel that there has been very little slowdown. In fact, like Esther mentioned, there is a focus on the S element. For many years, it was the E, the environment in ESG, environmental social governance, performance of a company. But now, many corporates are taking note of the S element a lot more and wanting to incorporate that. We see that in our green financing, in ESG linked loans. We have borrowers ask to include social performance improvement targets as part of their ESG linked loans. So, there is that battle to attract capital from investors and green financing, and E and S and G all form a very important part of it. So we feel that, you can see the numbers with green bonds, you can see the numbers with the new sustainability linked bonds, where the sustainability performance is linked to your bond. It's pretty impressive, the momentum that's taken on.
Could you, and just before I go to the other two panelists, could you just, for those in the audience who, again, you were very clear in the beginning about sort of what this area is, but could you give us a couple of examples of the kind of thing that you see companies coming to you looking, or universities, maybe in the case of NUS, coming to you looking to do? I mean, just paint a picture for the sort of projects that you're doing. Is it buildings? Is it transport? Is it power stations? I mean, what kind of things are you funding?
So we offer, DBS offers green financing across the board, across the spectrum. There is no, of course, the leaders in sustainability are kind of at the forefront of this green financing, but we are actually encouraging SMEs. We work with corporates of all sizes, and we reiterate this all the time, that green financing is absolutely not for large corporates only, that, smaller companies, we would absolutely be happy to provide them with the support, should be on their journey to improve their sustainability performance, to digitize, to take advantage of what's out there right now. We offer ESG linked loans, so environmental social governance targets, predetermined targets are set to for a specific loan for a corporate, and we reduce our interest rates if those corporates achieve those targets. Then there's products like green bonds, sustainability linked bonds. Of course, the bond market is very much they're very much active, very much gaining momentum. And then there's green loans, which are more, very much in Singapore, at least, very much tailored to the real estate market. However, we see a varying backgrounds of varying types of businesses coming to us, looking for green financing, looking for more and more innovative green products. So we are constantly innovating, with our clients to come up with new products and solutions that could work for them.
Okay, excellent. So Kuan, what about, I'll go to you and then Esther. I mean, you mentioned that the pandemic had some challenges for your particular bond, but I wondered, do you draw any more general lessons beyond NUS's experience about how you think the pandemic might either encourage or disencourage organizations to take more of these options?
Well, COVID-19 has affected us in many ways, even in terms of sustainability. It has got a huge impact in the sense that it has, first of all, when it comes to take, for example, construction projects, operationally, because of the labor supply situation, because of COVID-19, they came to a halt. And therefore, in general, we experience a delay or a deferment of construction projects. And because of COVID-19, the contractors have to put in safe measures and so on. So there's an impact on construction cost. So COVID-19 certainly has led to some increase in cost in the construction projects, but more fundamentally, it has resulted in us having to rethink about the future infrastructure.
We may have lost you. Let's see if Kuan is going to come back for us, or if we've lost him. Okay.
So what kind of facilities do we need?
Oh, we've missed you. We're losing you a little bit, Kuan. Can you hear us? All right. Let's turn to Esther briefly, and then we'll see if Kuan will come back. Ironically, Kuan joined us today from his office specifically for good internet. So maybe NUS needs a good internet bond as well as a green bond. Esther, how have you found the pandemic kind of affecting this
But there's also a human wellness to it.
Oh.
Okay.
Hi, hello.
Kuan, you were cutting in and out, I'm afraid. I don't know. Yeah. Do you want to try again and see? I was just saying you joined us specifically to have good internet, but do you want to try again and see if it's going to work?
Yeah, I'll just quickly summarize. Sorry, the internet connection not very stable. First of all, operationally, because of COVID-19, there's a delay in construction projects. We see an increase in construction costs that's going up. So this has got implications. And for the university, because of so much learning content has gone digital, we have to rethink what will be the future infrastructural needs and how can we modify our current bank of buildings and so on to fit the future needs. So that's one challenge. And I think also the COVID-19 has brought an additional angle into sustainability. It's not just being green to an environment and so on, but the new angle could be what my colleagues in School of Design and Environment has been promoting all along, the wellness angle, human wellness. How can we make our buildings and infrastructure that will be more conducive and healthy for people to work in? So I think, COVID-19 certainly has introduced a lot of new, interesting, and very challenging thoughts into our minds, and a lot of work for us to do going forward.
Very good. Excellent. That was also crisp and clear on the internet for the latter section. So that was great. Esther, what have you
Yes.
seen? Again, we're on the topic of the pandemic here. So,
Yeah.
I mean, do you feel that this, you said in your introduction, you thought that this could be an accelerant. So it sounds like you're an optimist about these things.
Yeah, it has been. I will touch on the global investment landscape first, then I zoom in the property area, just expand on what Kuan talked about, that we have to look at the way we design and build and manage. And okay, first, I think definitely COVID has accelerated the overall responsible investing landscape globally. And if you look at the UNPRI, which is stand for Principle for Responsible Investment, which was set up in 2006. At that time, there was only 63 signatory and managing assets of 6.5 trillion US dollar. And fast track to today, they have more than 3,000 investors, under its umbrella now, and together it manage assets under management is more than US $100 trillion. So for listed company, if you want to have a share of this pie, and you have to dish out very strong environmental, and ESG report card. And investors, have never been, as vocal and as clear as now. Over the last, 6-7 months after COVID, Larry Fink, which is the biggest, the CEO of BlackRock, the biggest, asset managers in the world, that he has already said that climate risk are actually investment risks. And they are not going to invest in company with high sustainability related risks. So this is one point about, investors are really driving change. So when you talk about property, which actually I mentioned that actually real estate has very strong environmental and social impact. And you don't have to be in the real estate sector to have an impact on the building, on the built environment. Research show that people in average spend 90% indoor, of your time indoor. So how you use the facility and the utility at home, at work, or even, when you travels in hotels, in schools, and all that, have an impact on the environment and on the carbon footprint of buildings as well. So, and of course, when we look at how to move the needle, how to help the world to, achieve the so-called advancing net zero, vision by 2050, and we have seen news about Paris Agreement, is giving all the, businesses and actually the governments, national governments, to adjust and raise their commitments to reduce carbon emission target. By end of this year, they have to submit, and Singapore has been really forthcoming to raise our commitment as well. So when you look at the whole world's, commitment on reducing, carbon footprint towards a low carbon, economy, and how are we going to achieve it? It does affect businesses and individuals, as most of us actually know that last year, January 2019, Singapore has already rolled out carbon tax. And we are not the only countries to do so. And in fact, our carbon tax is actually much milder than those in Europe and US. So if for multinational, there is actually a cost for your carbon footprint. So how do we look, to plan not just about today, but also tomorrow? We have to look at R&D, and that was also why we partner, NUS as far back as 2017, and we have already have quite a lot of research and ongoing and in the 2 labs that we have been looking at. And in fact, we are not just looking at things like, how to lower the carbon footprint, but we also look at antibacterial, antifungal, and technology solutions, and we support R&D. And in fact, since 2017, innovation has been, voted as our top ESG material issues. And this is aligned with the global investors' view. We don't just look at short term, but we look at long term. Without technology, without solutions, without innovation, you can't move the needle. You can't really, lower the carbon footprint. So that is where, fundings are important. So green financing, sustainable financing, really fit into the formula that how are we going to enlarge our financing stream to enable us to look into all these technologies that can help to lower the carbon footprint of infrastructure, how from the beginning of from design, from ventilation, from the use of renewable energy, solar panels, and even antibacterial, antifungal paint work, and even technologies that can help residents to track their air qualities and all that. So I think green financing, money talks. Without funding, you can't really go deep into technology, go deep into solutions or green building technology. So I think definitely, if you ask me, we are very near the tipping point that we will never go back. Even after COVID has find a vaccine and find the solutions, people are so used to space, social distancing, and also higher level of hygiene and sanitation, and all that. So I think definitely green financing is an enabler for us to achieve low carbon and also a more sustainable lifestyles.
Great. Okay, that's terrific. So that's a good overview. So okay, sense of optimism about the pandemic. I'll go next to Kuan and then to Berenice. So at the beginning, I sort of set up this thing people talk about in this sector about the balance of financing green and greening finance, the different sides of this agenda, getting more money into green projects that might not be able to get it, but then also trying to find ways of putting sustainability at the heart of the wider financial system. So Kuan, I wonder, I'll turn to you on this. I should actually just say before we go there that we've already got some excellent questions from our audience. So I see one of our faculty members, Dora, has asked a question, which I'll get to in a minute. There are a couple of others that are very interesting. So I'll turn to those in just a second. Those of you who do want to ask questions, as Ashley said, if you don't change your name and you come out as anonymous attendee, then we don't know who you are. So if you are an anonymous attendee, then write your name at the bottom of the question and your institutional affiliation if you want us to give you a name check, which of course we're very happy to do. So yeah, Kuan, in terms of financing green, I mean, what did NUS learn from this process about how you can get more money into green projects, or in a sense that institutions would want to find green financing to develop more green projects? What was your learning out of that on the financing green side of this debate?
Yeah, thanks, James, for the question. In fact, just now I shared that initially we were not warm to the idea of issuing a green bond. Later on, we changed our mind. But after we launched the green bond, we realized that, and we were quite surprised actually, at the very warm reception from the investors. The $300 million inaugural bond issuance was snapped up straight away. And we received many requests and inquiries after that to inquire whether they will have a chance to participate in taking up our bond issuance in the future. And some of those inquiries come from overseas. And be mindful that the green bond that we issue was in Singapore dollars. Now, if we were to issue it in a foreign currency, let's say in US dollars, I think that will even make it even more accessible in terms of tapping potential investors in overseas countries and so on. So first of all, James, I was very surprised, pleasantly so, at the very strong demand coming from investors. And later on, as I looked into the matter even more, I start to realize that for a lot of investors out there, they have set internal targets that X% of their portfolio in terms of investment must be green related. And I can foresee that this trend, especially now with COVID-19, will only escalate going into the future. So my hindsight experience of all this is that had we not tapped into Green Bond, had we not set up the green framework, we'll be missing out a very large piece out there in terms of investment pool, in terms of availability of funds and so on, which we would otherwise not be able to tap if we have not chosen to set up a green framework and to raise green financing. So I don't think it's a matter of choice going forward, James. It is not a matter of choice. Going forward, more and more investors, more and more funds will insist that they want to only take part in green financing. And for those who have not started on this path, they are going to miss out a lot of opportunities.
Very good. And then, so Maranisa, what about the other way around? So in a sense, what Kuan Wu said there is very instructive, which is one of the reasons why there's money coming into this area, is that people have set targets that they're now getting a bit embarrassed that they haven't got enough green finance and they want to have more of it. There's pressure on institutions to do this. But what more can you say about what you see happening on the financial system side? Because in a sense, it's, I would guess, more important from a green finance agenda to have sustainability at the heart of the financial system rather than simply the narrower problem of trying to get capital into green projects. So what do you see on that side of things, both from DBS and more generally in terms of regulation?
Thank you, James. That's a really interesting discussion here, because I think it is important to balance out not just the green financing bit, but like you said, the other side of it, which is, of course, Singapore's financial sector, or any financial sector, can play quite a useful role in catalyzing sustainable and green finance in the region, directing finance towards, like Esther said, innovation and really being able to promote that sustainable development momentum. However, there is the other side of it, which is so the push, I guess I should say, has to come from both sides. I think one of the really welcome developments that we see specifically in Singapore is what our regulator MAS is doing to take very active steps to promote sustainable financing in our financial sector, and including engaging financial institutions to consider ESG criteria in decision-making processes, in supporting the adoption of industry standards and guidelines. For example, the TCFD, which is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Again, these may be slightly new terms for perhaps other students, but do look it up. Encouraging industry-led capacity building efforts, developing the green bond market in Singapore, collaborating with local stakeholders and international counterparts, and really distilling best practices. So there is not just that one aspect of, providing green financing to our clients and our borrowers, but also looking inwards on what we're doing to really, push that sustainable development agenda internally, and what's being done across the board with financial institutions, and what role our regulators is playing, which is absolutely fantastic, and we welcome that.
Very good. Let me stay with you. So I'm going to open it up to some questions. I did say I wanted to ask, a couple of you have mentioned the kind of phenomenon of greenwashing, namely people claiming that finance is green when actually it isn't all that green, or often this falls under the G in ESG, where the barrier is a bit lower for what counts as a project with good governance. But so Professor Benjamin Kishore, who's a climate and finance specialist here at our school, he had a question which is a bit related to this. So he said, based on your experience so far in building green finance, what do you think the lessons are for the role in keeping within 1.5 or 2 degrees of warming by mid-century? More specifically, he says, how might we distinguish green finance initiatives that could plausibly help meet the Paris Accord commitments from those that might only result in a 3 or 4 degree world? So I suppose here we have a kind of broad question, which is there's a distribution of projects. There are those that claim to be green, which aren't. And then there are those that are green, but which are not, in a sense, maybe this is what you meant, Maranisa, by transition financing, that they're not actually contributing as much as they need to get to where the planet needs to be. So I wondered if I could throw that broad area to the three of you. Maranisa, I'll start with you, and then either Kian-Woo or Esther, if you have something to add, please do so. But how do you technically sort of make distinctions between projects and where you're putting money that will contribute towards the overall climate goals that we need, and those that won't, but may, do some good in other areas?
Sure. So I'll start off with the fact that, there has been no in the past and still isn't one set definition of what green is. So, in Europe, in the US, and in Asia, and financial institutions have tended to define green for themselves, what it means to them. There have been bottlenecks when it comes to the slow pace of issuance, for example, of green finance, by not being able to define, or financial institutions have been kind of wary of providing green financing to organizations that are a bit brown. So there have been bottlenecks in helping them transition. This applies specifically to Asia, where we are there has been hurdles in jumping through those hoops to provide green financing. Again, getting into the discussion of what it I think you mentioned being Paris aligned, or 2 degree world, or 1.5 degree. I think a lot of organizations and corporates in Asia have started to make that transition, have started to think about this, diversifying their business models, and if they haven't, they very much are aligning themselves with the thought process, at least. So there is that acknowledgement, but also I think it's important to understand that to really be able to say, we are Paris aligned. Let's say if a corporate comes to us and says, we want to have an ESG linked loan, and we are Paris aligned, we have to look at international best standards, best practices. So science-based targets, do company have those? Very few companies, of course, have those right now. Many are working towards them. I think it's a bit of at the risk of using the term too much, but it's a bit of a process, and a transition process, whereby all these movements will happen happening at the same time. So it's for us, DBS Bank, when we look at what kind of companies and clients we want to work with, we look at like-minded companies. When we are looking at companies that are at the beginning kind of journey of their sustainability journey, we look at how we can align to external best practices, to benchmarks that are already available, to best practices that are already available. So we have to make sure that we align ourselves with the best external standards possible. Of course, we look at the green loan principles, the sustainability linked loan principles. We look at the International Capital Market Association, ICMA, and they deliver climate transition finance guidelines. So we look at external guidelines, and we look at issuing green finance products for our clients.
Very good. Okay, the questions are flooding in now. So that was great. Thank you for that, Maranisa. Kian-Woo, Esther, do either of you have a sort of thought on this broad area?
Definitely, I have. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's break it into like green bond and also green loan. Okay. For green bond, if based on our own experience as an international company, we adopt the global practices, the green bond principle. And I think for green bond, I would imagine that with such stringent requirement. It is really, I don't think that it is easy for anyone, issuers to really do, able to do greenwashing. Okay. First, I mean, as what Kuan said, the whole process is really very stringent. We have to have a second opinion provider to set up a framework, set targets. And basically, when you talk about green financing, green bond, there are three main areas, which is, first, of course, energy. And then the second one is the water. And the third one is actually waste management. So green bonds are basically, contributes to these three broad area. But of course, each bond, you have to set your own, targets and all that. Our first green bond is actually using our Republic Plaza as, using the energy and green building standards, that it is independent or certified. So after the second opinion provider, the framework has to be subject to the third party audit, which we had one of the big four accountants to actually certify it. And last but not least, we sent to the London-based Climate Bond Initiative to stamp it. So you have gone through three layers of assessment. So for bond issuance, that is also explaining why in Singapore there are only a handful of bonds that have been issued. But since late 2018, sustainability linked loan has been really growing very, very fast in Singapore. And in 2019, there were actually 19 of such sustainability linked loan. And this is an area that people have a bit more doubt, because it is basically between the lender and the borrower. And it is not as stringent, as onerous as green bond. For green bond, you can go onto our website. Your framework must be publicly available. It's posted online. And you must come up with an annual report to look at what you have set the target and how you have achieved it. So every year is still, the annual report is subject to external third-party, assessment audit as well. So mine is already done. Mine is a 2-year bond, and we have done all these, and it is all online. And but for green loan, or sustainability linked loan, is a little bit less stringent. Okay, and you are not required to post your framework or annual report. But that is also why there's, MAS has also pushed very hard to make sure that the lender have to be disciplined and have to really impose on what are the terms for the sustainability linked loan. So I think the world is very, very transparent nowadays. So I think, the so-called greenwashing, it is not as easy. And the ESG investor analysts are also very, very stringent in their assessment. And actually, there was a couple of questions to ask about how does it contribute to the global goals. And interestingly, 60% of the green bond users are actually from building and energy sectors. So this clearly, shows that a lot of, bulk of the green bond proceeds actually go to lower the carbon footprint of infrastructure, and also carbon footprint of, or clean energy. So this is something that we can, safely say that green bond and green financing really can contribute to the, the global goal of advancing net zero.
Very good. Okay, terrific. Can we, not both on this question, but somebody called Eden T asked a kind of question which was related to Professor Kishore's question. He said, congratulations on the issuance of the Green Bond. What does NUS see as its role in achieving Singapore's Paris Agreement NDCs, the voluntary commitments that Singapore made when utilizing the bond monies, mindful of the fact that the unit of measurement for the Paris Agreement goals is still the nation state? So, I mean, either of those questions or both, if you see what I mean. But what have you observed about the kind of relation between this green finance area and the broader climate challenge seen from NUS's point of view?
Yeah, I can't speak on behalf of Singapore, but I can definitely say that, state categorically that NUS is deeply committed in sustainability, and not just in making the campus green and more sustainable, but also we have a lot of researchers, right, working on a lot of research projects. So, for example, I've got research colleagues in Ceres. Ceres is an institute that's looking at renewable energy, solar energy. How can solar energy be applied in Singapore, given the constraints of the Singapore environment? because in order to generate solar energy, you need a lot of space for solar panels. So for land scarce Singapore, what is the strategy and what are the technologies that we can employ to make solar energy more usable and more productive for use in Singapore? So NUS, I think it's amazing. We have a multifaceted approach to sustainability, not just in the infrastructure in the campus, not just in operating the campus, but also in research, in education, in engagement with the community and so on, to spread the word of sustainability and so on. So NUS has a large role to play, and therefore, green finance, the green bond that we have launched, is just a small element in the total picture that would help us finance some of these initiatives with the proceeds that we have received from the investors. And I agree with Esther, and I think the ESG investors, the green bond investors, they are a very discerning lot. Therefore, for those who attempt to do greenwashing and so on, the damage to their corporate reputation is going to be huge if they're found out to be engaged in greenwashing. But that said, I think, like all investments, the investors need to beware of the potential risks that they are in. So in our case, NUS, next year, we'll be publishing our first report. And we hope through, the framework that we have set up, the reports that we're going to issue and so on, we'll be able to reassure those who have invested their money with us that their funds have indeed been put into good use towards green purposes.
Could I, James, could I actually give two examples that how NUS have engaged a corporate partner like us? In fact, we have actually worked with SERIS, the Singapore and Sustainable Energy Research Institute Singapore SERIS. Yeah, we are working on two pilot projects, like what Ken would say. Singapore is land scarce. We are looking at building integrated solar panel. So we have already started piloting it with a series at our construction site, combining prefabrication technology with BIPV. That's one. Another one coming up soon in the next quarter is to also look at a new generation of BIPV with even pattern and design, and to look at how it. But all these R&D work takes time. You have to track the performance. You have to, look at how we can improve on the harvest of solar energy. But safe to say that there are a lot of actually research work going on, and the NUS academic side and also businesses like us, industry player, are actually collaborating. Not just starting from today. It's actually quite some years already. Yeah.
Super. Okay. Well, so we've got a range in our audience today, but I think although Maranisa is joining us from Lahore in Pakistan, I think the prize for the most distant joiner is going to go to Shane Jaffar, who's joining us from the Canadian state of Alberta, where he works for the Alberta state government, and green finance is one of his responsibilities. And so Shane asks, since we're at a School of Public Policy, somebody had to ask this question, if accountants are going to help save the world, what is the role of governments, and what are some of the policies they need to put in place to support green financing? So I suppose to each of you, maybe Maranisa, I'll start with you, but then Kian Wu, Esther, chime in. I mean, if you were king or queen for the day, what would you like to see governments do in general, or here in Singapore, to encourage the growth of this area? Are there any obvious tax treatments or incentives that would be helpful given the urgency of this situation? So Maranisa, what's the kind of policy agenda that you want to see here?
So I talked about, what our regulator in Singapore, MAS, is doing, and they are very much working on a comprehensive long-term strategy to make sustainable financing a defining key feature of Singapore's role as an international finance center. Singapore, there's the Green Finance Action Plan that has been published to make, the world greener, and we must make green finance available to build resilience, to develop markets, to leverage technology. So all of these things provide an enabling institutional framework. So it can't just be the regulators, saying we need to do this. It has to come, the movement has to come from several different aspects. So whilst financial institutions have been working on green financing because it makes good business sense, it makes sense to partner with companies that are sustainable, to lend capital to companies and organizations that are really looking to make impact. On the other side, there's a regulator providing an enabling framework within which financial institutions in Singapore can really thrive. And if you look at the action plan that the MAS has come out with, they are looking to publish the risk management guidelines for financial institutions, which basically entails banking, insurance, and asset management sectors. And they will also be looking at developing grant schemes to support the mainstreaming of green and sustainability linked loans. So, it's not just a one-sided plan. It's, providing that regulatory structure, providing that financial incentive to support the expansion plans of external reviewers and rating agencies in Singapore to develop the technical capabilities. So there is a huge amount of focus on capacity building within in the Singapore market, looking at centers of excellence. So you look at all of these things and they kind of serve as little plugs that'll go in to really, have that enabling institutional framework that pushes green financing to the forefront. Of course, we, like I had mentioned before, welcome that. It doesn't, we're looking at different regulators. If you look at different regulators across the planet, really, you do see a movement towards providing this kind of, be it as comprehensive or not, I'm not sure. Of course, different regulators and central banks are at different stages of looking at the green financing, frameworks. But we do see a movement. We see a movement across Europe, across Asia. We look at, you look at central banks in, India, Thailand. You look at the discussions that are happening for financial institutions to take note of what their portfolios look like, how are they managing their environmental risk and who are they lending to, So there is a lot of pressure on financial institutions, be it banks, insurance, or asset managers, to really look at their own internal housekeeping and think about where their capital is being directed. James?
There we go. Very good. So we've got about 15 minutes left, and I've got quite a lot of questions. So what I'm going to do is go through some questions individually so that everyone doesn't answer every question. We've got a bunch of questions about measurement. So this is obviously a nerdy policy audience. So Ju Cheng Chen asks, what are your key considerations in financing projects? Akib asks, what metrics are there to check the credibility and longevity of projects? So Maranisa, I wondered, oh yes, and then Winona at the beginning asked, how are green bonds and green loans, how are their performance measured? So do you want to say a little bit about that, about the measurement side of things?
So I'd mentioned earlier in one of the points I made that we look at external benchmarks. So we don't just, when we set ESG targets for, let's say, a sustainability linked loan with a borrower, we don't just take their word for it, saying, oh, yes, we've achieved, the targets. The benchmarks are quite stringent. So we typically engage an external a third-party independent consultant, or the ESG targets could be linked to an external benchmark or an index. So we look at external validation, and that, separates us from having to make that determination, or has the borrower achieved the target? So we don't base it on, okay, I've achieved the targets and we just take your word for it. The process is quite stringent. I think Esther also touched upon it, that it can be a little, it can be not as stringent perhaps, but I think it depends on the internal due diligence frameworks you have in place. And at DBS, we very much look at stringent external validation. And only once we have achieved confirmation from an external party that the ESG targets have been achieved, we then issue the discount or the incentive that has been promised to the borrower as an incentive to further improve their sustainability performance. So coming back to, how do we determine? I think one of the most important factors is annual reporting. And of course, Esther touched upon that as well. And for the NUS Green Bond, we look at impact reporting. Where has the impact been made? What improvements have been made? Where possible, can the report be made, public? And in certain circumstances, depending on the terms and conditions, some reports do have confidentiality aspects to them, but typically annual reporting is required. Of course, different products work differently, but for green bonds as well, for ESG linked loans, for green loans, it may be different, but we do expect, and these terms and conditions are discussed, prior to kind of signing the dotted line when transactions are completed, but we do expect annual reporting on where the financing has been used on. I'm just giving an example. It's not a comprehensive list, but improvements, ESG, and of course improvements in targets, whether the targets have been met or not. So all of these things add to make the green finance product robust. And at DBS, we align ourselves with best practice guidelines that are available, or external benchmarks that may may be relevant for different products.
Very good. Let me ask a couple of questions to Kuan Wu. So one is from an alumni, Jason Brown. He asked, what were the additional administrative changes that you were worried about when opting for green financing on top of existing principles or protocols? And there was another question for you. I think in your introduction, you had said that about the pricing of the bond. And so one of our questioners was saying that he was a little bit surprised that NUS is not saving costs by issuing green bonds, because they say most green bonds are issued at rates that are lower than the prevailing market rates for otherwise similar credit risks. I think this is a question from Abhishek Bajaj, who's asked a few questions in the session. So Kuan Wu, do you want to sort of take those two and talk a little bit about your own experience?
Yeah, sure, James. Let me tackle the second question first. Now, in terms of pricing, yes, I've read somewhere that some issuers have experienced the more advantageous rates, lower interest costs, and so on from issuing green bonds. But I must say we have not experienced that. Maybe that's our first issuance. Maybe in our subsequent issuances, we will have a better experience. But so far, that has not been the case. And yesterday, I just had a lunch with a banker, and we talked about the green bond issuance and so on. And he too confirms that as far as he knows, the issuers that he has been working with have not experienced any rate advantage as well. Maybe Esther can chime in later. Now, turning to administrative work that's required. Now, first of all, when setting up the green bond, just now we have talked about, you need to set up the green framework, you need to have it externally reviewed, etc. All this takes cost and time and effort. And of course, in this regard, MAS is very supportive. They do have a grant to help issuers defray some of the costs, and that's very helpful. So there's a one-time setup cost with relation to green framework. And subsequently, on an ongoing basis, number one, we need to keep a register of how the funds have been applied. And on top of that, every year we need to issue an annual report to the investors to assure them that the funds are properly deployed and so on. And all this takes efforts and costs. But overall, although these are additional efforts, right, given the growing demand of green financing and so on, I think it's a well worth effort.
If I may chime in, James.
Yeah.
Actually, when we launched it in 2017, the benefits, the economic or financial benefits, let's put it this way, were even less evident. But why we did it is because we want to start the ball rolling, and then, it is also aligned with our long-standing commitments to drive, the green agenda. So that was point one. And what we feel is like it has been really giving us very strong recognitions, and branding is really something that it is priceless. And I would say that even up to today, you may not see the price benefits as strong as those happening in Europe and all, but I wouldn't say that it is more expensive. And in fact, the rates that we got is very favorable. And if I may just give a concrete example of what Lisa have said about how do you track, the target and assess, performance. If I use the SDG innovation loan as an example, so we have to pack our performance first to our sustainability ranking or rating, whether it is Dow Jones, CDP, or MSCI. So that is point one. Okay, that means on the corporate level, we must maintain the high commitment to ESG performance. Secondly, is about the loan. Why you pack it to SDG? There are 17 goals. So we have to come up with innovations that can actually support SDG, which is actually a global standard. Is not like it's not set by DBS or CDL. So if it is related to, for example, clean energy, I will have to get the local authority to certify that, yes, this is an innovation first of its kind, and also after the lab test, and is really going to reduce energy carbon footprint by X%, for example. So it has to be like steps, and trust me, dealing with banks, they are very, very stringent. Then they will consider the so-called incentive that we have actually set, when we establish this agreement on the SDG innovation loan. So we are still working on it, and but I would say that with such initiative, such vehicle, it really helped innovation and drive the green agenda. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, now, so we're coming towards the end of our time. I promised that in the end, the final question I'm going to ask all of my panelists is going to be for our student audience who might be thinking about this area as a chance to get a job. And so I wanted to ask at the end, all three of you, in a sense, how you came to be working in this sector and what advice you have. But before we do that, we do have a couple of other quick questions which I wanted to touch on. There was an interesting one from BB Singh, who said, based on the lessons that we're learning while implementing green finance in Singapore, how can we help countries in the region from gaining from our lessons and leapfrogging so they can also have a green development plan? And I thought, Marinisa, I might ask you this. I mean, Singapore is a financial center and so its role within the region is much larger than just here in Singapore. And the most pressing need for green finance is not actually in rich countries like Singapore, it's in poorer developed. So both, but just in general, could you tell us something about the role of green finance in Southeast Asia in particular, and how that appears to be developing? Who are the leading countries, or how do you see this area developing? And then I shall ask you all about your career trajectories and what advice you have for people who want to actually work in the world of green finance. So Marinisa, go ahead. So
that's a really interesting question, because you're right. It's Singapore, of course, is and looking to. They are at the forefront, but also looking to kind of really help drive the green finance movement. I don't think it's just restricted to Singapore. I'll give DBS as an example. Of course, we work across our core markets. We operate in a number of countries, of course, in Asia, and we are looking at green loans in many different parts. For example, in India, we're looking at green financing in Vietnam, in Indonesia. We have completed transactions, ESG linked trade financing, or looking at ESG linked loans for different kinds of organizations, not just the ones that you see in Singapore. So absolutely, we look at green finance products across all of our capital markets. I think it's important to say as well that as the momentum picks up, as we complete and issue more transactions, and as the regulators in these countries and central banks start to really look at this movement, we look at countries that are really just starting out. Big, large, development banks like IFC and World Bank, they are looking to really push green financing agenda as well in the development projects that they are financing, looking to support the SDGs. So I think absolutely it has started perhaps, a bit slow in some parts of Asia, perhaps, but very much looking to, looking at the movement gaining momentum everywhere.
Very good. Okay, so let me ask each of the three of you in turn about, in a sense, this area. So it's a fast developing area, as a number of you said, didn't really exist in Asia in many ways beyond 5 years ago, certainly not 10 years ago. So it's a new area. It's also growing very fast. But I mean, so all three of you have found your way into here. So maybe you can tell us how you did that and how you've kind of managed your careers briefly, and what advice you might have for those who might want to kind of come into this space. And since we're coming out from time, if you also, my kind of final challenge is, tell us one thing that you're most excited about in this area of green finance as well, or that you think people coming into the sector should be most excited about. So Esther, why don't I ask you first, and then I'll go to Kuan and then Maronisa. So Esther, what advice do you have for people who might want to
first, of course, for my own journey, it is like from the early day, which is like, I started in 1995 into this area. I'm a comms specialist and a branding. So I started in that area that look at how we can, look at, conserving as we construct and all that. And fast track to today, there are plenty of training and actually degree courses for environmental management training and engineering and also accountancy and all that. And I'm sure that just now we already mentioned about the Singapore Green Finance, Center that MAS is setting up in partnership with many banks and all that. But when I hire in my team, actually I have a mixed bag of people. One thing in common is their passion. Okay, they must have very strong interest and passion in the environmental area, especially. And of course, I have accountancy students, graduate who is supporting the area of green financing and also sustainability reporting. And as you know, that sustainability reporting is also a big, huge area that can spend another 2 hours to talk about it. And it's getting more and more technical. And even for me, after 25 years, I'm still reading, learning every day. Okay, so and I also have people who are environmental management trained graduates. I have a couple of them because we need to look at building performance. We need to look at the environmental, and issues and how to lower carbon footprint and how to calculate, greenhouse gas emission reduction target and science-based target and all that. So these are the key areas that the graduates, the qualification of my staff are. And I'm also sitting on board of the advisory committee of MEM, and I do have MEM graduate as well. So I think it is a mixed bag. But when I interview candidates, I always test them on their passion and their knowledge. Yeah.
Very good. Kuan, you came into this sector sort of mid-career, as it were, after having spent a while in the corporate sector. So what would you tell people, whether they're accountants who want to save the world or maybe non-accountants who want to save the world?
Well, in general, let me perhaps paint a more generic picture, and then we zoom into green finance for that matter. So in general, if I have to offer some career advice to people who aspire to develop their career, I would ask them to think about their career building blocks. And the career building blocks will consist of 3 categories. One, it's professional skills. The second category will be what I call competencies. And the third category will be exposures or experience. So take an accountant, for example. So the professional skills that we need to build, the knowing our debits and credits, knowing our accounting standards, etc., etc. And when it comes to competencies, it's leadership, that what Esther talked about just now, the passion and so on. So the ability to, to overcome a challenge, etc., etc., right? Competencies. And the third one will be exposures and experience. So turning all this into, the green finance perspective, right? If someone aspires to build a career in green finance, so you got to figure out what are the professional skills that you need to acquire for green financing, right? Are you prepared? Are you going to work in the bank? If you are going to work in the bank, as a green finance advisor, what skills do you need to have, right? And secondly, in the areas of competency, certainly things like communications is going to be very important, because think about the annual reports that need to issue, think about the investor engagement that you need to be engaged in. And lastly, in terms of experience and exposures, there's going to be, you have to start somewhere. So even us in NUS, launching the Green Bond was our first attempt. So my colleagues and I, we had no prior experience. But there are a lot of people out there who are able to help and guide you along the way. So you got to pick up along the way, and you got to overcome the whatever inertia that you may have. Pick it up. So many people have done it. Like in so many things, there's always a first time. Don't be afraid, right? Start somewhere. Start building your exposures and experience, and over time, I think you'll be well on your way to develop a very nice career in whatever chosen field that you have chosen.
Very good. Thank you so much. Maranisa, final word to you. We've got about a minute to go before we close. So what quick advice would you have for those who want to get into this area?
I guess my advice would be, it's an absolutely fantastic time to get into this. There is so much information, opportunity, and momentum available to really ride the wave. When I went to study environmental sciences, numerous years ago, it was really, there were not that many jobs. There was not a huge amount of awareness of this topic. Green finance is a real interesting blend of environmental knowledge and also knowledge that you need to work at a bank, finance related, or looking at capital market products. So it blends the two beautifully together. And I think if there is a time to get into it and really learn a lot, there are so many opportunities available, from training, workshops, like Esther mentioned, to internships. There's so many of us who didn't have that when we started out. So now is a really good time.
Super. Okay, that's great. Well, thank you so much to all of those of you who've asked questions, and in particular, thank you to my panelists. This was a terrific discussion. I felt like we covered a huge amount of ground, and thanks also to Ashish and his team from our Sustainable Investment Group. We'll be doing more events in this series, so please sort of follow us on LinkedIn and on Twitter and all the various channels. So many thanks for that. Thank you in particular for our 3 panelists, to Kim, Esther, and Maranisa. Ashley, shall I hand over to you just to close out the event?
Yes, please. We could have the slide on. Yes, thank you very much, James, for moderating this wonderful session. So I'll just to close by just saying that, as things become more multidisciplinary, as policy students who are out there who are interested to work in development banks, who are interested to take up government affairs positions when you finish, this is an opportunity to open your minds to different topics that might be relevant or that you might come into contact with as you graduate and go out into the market. And green finance is one topic to highlight to our students' attention. Now, we would like to thank you for being a great audience. Your feedback is important to us. So if I may have the slide on, I've just posted the feedback form that we'd like you to complete in the chat below. So please use your share your feedback by scanning this QR code below. Now, this is also an opportunity for us to connect some of the alumni who are here with us here today with our student group. So the next slide, please. So if you want to receive updates from the social investment group, which is a student group led by Ashish, please scan the QR code below, and you can be on their mailing list for some other related events that this student group do on their own. And last but not least, the next slide. In the registration form, then you sign up for this event. You might also notice that from Career Services, if you'd like us to reach out to you for your campus recruitment efforts, we'll be happy to do so. And we'll be having a career fair next year. And employers who are interested to participate, this is an early shout out. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you, wonderful panelists, James for moderating, Ashish, our student leader, and his team, as well as everyone who are here with us today. And we hope to see you at the next event. Thank you very much.